The stars were dying, and everyone knew it that Commander Jake Torres stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiance, watching through the massive viewport as another alien ship fled past Earth's solar system. This one was huge, maybe 10 times the size of his own vessel, with smooth blue metal that seemed to flow like water. It was an Altari mothership, carrying millions of refugees away from the galactic core. Jake had been watching this exodus for 3 days now. Ship after ship, fleet after fleet, all heading in the same direction. Away from the center of the galaxy. Away from home. Away from the war they could not win. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss. Admiral Lisa Grant walked onto the bridge, her face grim. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Right now, those eyes looked tired. "How many today?" she asked, standing beside Jake at the viewport. 47 ships in the last hour, Jake replied. The big ones are carrying entire populations. The smaller ones look like military escorts. Another ship passed by as they watched. This one was different from the Altari vessel. It looked like it was made of living coral, all curves and organic shapes. Pink and orange lights pulsed along its surface like a heartbeat. A Kelani bio-ship. "They're all running," Jake said quietly. "Every single one of them," Lisa nodded. "Can you blame them? The reports from the front lines are getting worse every day. The Void Swarm has taken another 12 systems this week alone." Jake had read those reports. They were terrifying. The Void Swarm was not like any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. They were machines, but not the kind that followed simple programming. They learned. They adapted. They grew stronger with every battle, every victory, every world they consumed. The swarm had appeared from dark space 5 years ago. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They simply arrived and began to devour everything in their path. Planets, ships, entire civilizations disappeared into their mechanical maw. At first, the great alien empires had tried to fight. The Altari, with their energy weapons that could crack moons. The Nexus, with their crystal ships that moved faster than light itself. The Kelani, with their living vessels that could heal from any damage. All of them had thrown their best warriors and their finest technology at the swarm. All of them had lost. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Davis from the communications station. "We're getting a priority transmission from Coalition Command." Lisa and Jake exchanged glances. Coalition Command was the joint headquarters for all the major alien powers. If they were calling, it was important. "Put it through," Lisa ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of Ambassador Thale, the Altari representative to Earth. His skin was pale blue, almost white, and his large black eyes held no pupils that humans could see. When he spoke, his voice carried the musical quality that all Altari possessed. "Admiral Grant," Thale began, "I bring you the final decision of the Coalition Council." "Final decision?" Lisa asked. "The core worlds are lost," Thale said simply. "The swarm cannot be stopped by conventional means. We have run every calculation, considered every strategy. The mathematics are clear. Continued resistance will only result in total extinction." Jake felt his stomach drop. He had known this was coming, but hearing it said out loud made it real. "The evacuation is complete," Thale continued. "All major populations have been relocated to the Outer Rim territories. We will establish new colonies there and wait. The dozing swarm will eventually exhaust itself, consuming the abandoned core worlds. When that happens, we will return and rebuild." "What about the smaller colonies?" Lisa asked. "The independent worlds?" "They have been advised to evacuate immediately. Any world that remains in swarm territory after tomorrow will be considered lost." Thale paused, his alien features somehow managing to convey sadness. "This includes Earth and all human colonies, Admiral Grant. You must leave now while you still can." The bridge fell silent. Jake could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines, the quiet beeping of various instruments. Normal sounds that suddenly seemed very important. "I understand," Lisa said finally. "Thank you for the warning, Ambassador." "It is not a warning, Admiral. It is a direct order from the Coalition Council. All member species are required to evacuate." Immediately, Lisa's jaw tightened. "Humanity appreciates the Council's concern. We'll take your recommendation under consideration." "Admiral," Thale's voice took on an urgent tone, "you do not understand. This is not a suggestion. The swarm has consumed civilizations that are millions of years older than humanity. They have technologies you cannot imagine. They have faced enemies that make your greatest weapons look like children's toys. All of them failed." "Maybe," Lisa said quietly. "But they're not human." Thale stared at her through the screen for a long moment. Finally, he shook his head. "You are making a mistake, Admiral. A fatal one." "Maybe, but it's our mistake to make." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence once again. Jake looked at his Admiral, wondering what she was thinking. Around them, the bridge crew continued their duties, but he could feel the tension in the air. "Admiral," Jake said carefully, "what are your orders?" Lisa was quiet for a moment, staring out at the stars. Another alien ship passed by, this one made of what looked like living crystal that caught and reflected the light of Sol in brilliant rainbows. A Nexus vessel. "Send a message to Fleet Command," she said finally. "Tell them the Coalition is pulling out. Tell them we've been ordered to evacuate." "And our response?" Jake asked. Lisa turned to face him, and Jake saw something in her eyes that he had rarely seen before. It was not fear or desperation. It was determination, pure and simple. "Our response is simple, Commander. We're staying," Jake nodded. He had expected as much. It was what humans did. When things got difficult, when the odds were impossible, when everyone else ran away, humans dug in and fought harder. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Davis called from the station, "I'm picking up another transmission. It's from President Roberts." "Put him through," Lisa ordered. The president's face appeared on screen. He was an older man with kind eyes and gray hair, but right now he looked like he had aged 10 years in the past week. Behind him, Jake could see the familiar blue and white of Earth through the windows of the orbital station. "Admiral," the president said, "I assume you've heard from the Coalition?" "Yes, sir. They've ordered us to evacuate." "And what do you think of that order?" Lisa smiled for the first time in days. "I think they don't know humans very well, sir." President Roberts smiled back. "My thoughts exactly. I've just finished a call with the other world leaders. The vote was unanimous. We're not running." "Sir," Lisa said, "I have to ask, are you sure about this?" "The aliens are right about one thing. The odds are not in our favor." "Admiral," the president said, 500 years ago, a small group of farmers and merchants decided to fight the most powerful military in the world. The odds were not in their favor either. But they won because they had something their enemy didn't." "What was that, sir?" "They had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for." The president paused. "Besides, someone has to make a stand. Someone has to draw a line in the sand and say, no further. If we don't do it, who will?" Jake found himself nodding. It was crazy. It was probably suicide, but it was also right. "What are your orders, sir?" Lisa asked. "Prepare the fleet, Admiral. If the swarm wants Earth, they're going to have to come through us to get it." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge quiet once more. Outside, the last of the alien evacuation ships disappeared into the darkness between stars. Soon, humanity would be alone in the galaxy, facing an enemy that had already destroyed civilizations older than human history, but they would not run. They would stand and fight, because that was what humans did. That was what they had always done. Jake looked out at the stars and wondered if they would still be shining tomorrow. The war was coming, and humanity was ready to meet it. The first probe arrived 3 weeks after the aliens left. Captain Riley Stone was inspecting the mining equipment on Kepler 442b when the alarm started screaming. She dropped her tools and ran toward the command center, her boots clanging on the metal walkways that connected the mining platforms. Around her, the other miners were doing the same thing, their faces showing the same mix of fear and determination she felt in her gut. The colony on Kepler 442b was small, just 800 people working the asteroid mining stations that orbited the planet. It was not an important world by galactic standards. It had no strategic value, no rare resources, no major population centers. It was exactly the kind of place that military planners would write off as acceptable losses. Riley had different ideas. About that, what do we have? She asked as she burst into the command center. The room was small and cramped, filled with monitors showing feeds from the mining platforms and the early warning sensors scattered throughout the system. "Single contact," reported Tom Miller, the head of station security. He was a big man with calloused hands and the kind of steady voice that made people feel safer just by hearing it, moving in from the outer system. "It's small, maybe the size of a fighter craft." Riley studied the sensor display. The contact was moving in a straight line toward their position, not trying to hide or use any kind of stealth. It was broadcasting no signals, responding to no hails. It just kept coming. "How long until it gets here?" she asked. 6 hours at current speed," Tom replied. Riley nodded and activated the colony-wide communication system. Her voice echoed through every corridor, every HAB module, every mining platform in the system. "This is Captain Stone. As you all know, we've got company coming. This is probably a swarm scout, here to see what we're made of. I want everyone to remember what General Webb told us in his last transmission. Every world is a fortress. Every battle teaches us something new. Every stand we make gives humanity a better chance to win this war." She paused, looking around the command center at the faces of her people. They were miners, not soldiers. They had signed up to dig ore out of asteroids, not to fight mechanical monsters from the dark between stars. But they were here, and they were ready. "We've spent the last 3 weeks turning this place into a trap. Now we get to see if it works. All mining crews, report to your assigned defensive positions. Security teams, man the weapon emplacements. Everyone else, get to the shelters and stay there until this is over." The next 6 hours passed like a strange dream. Riley moved through the colony, checking on the preparations they had made. The mining charges that had been rigged as improvised explosives, the industrial cutters that had been mounted as weapons, the ore haulers that had been armored and turned into makeshift tanks. It was not much compared to the kind of military hardware that the great alien empires had thrown at the swarm, but it was what they had, and they would make it count. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived on the emergency transport just as the swarm probe entered the inner system. She was a small woman with dark hair and intense eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She had been studying swarm technology since the war began, trying to understand how the enemy worked. "Any idea what we're dealing with?" Riley asked, as they watched the probe approach on the main display. "It's a scout," Elena said, her voice tight with concentration. "They always send these ahead of the main force. It will study our defenses, test our weapons, learn how we fight. Then it will report back to the swarm collective. So we kill it before it can report back." Elena shook her head. "It doesn't work that way. The swarm scouts are connected to the main network through quantum entanglement. Everything it learns, the whole swarm learns instantly. Even if we destroy it, the information will still get through." Riley felt a chill run down her spine. "So whatever we do here, they'll know how to counter it next time." "That's right. The swarm learns from every encounter. That's why they're so hard to fight. Every battle makes them stronger. Riley stared at the approaching probe and made a decision that would change everything. Then we're going to teach them something they won't expect. The probe was beautiful, in its own terrifying way. It looked like a metal spider the size of a fighter jet, with legs that ended in different kinds of sensors and weapons. Its hull was dark and smooth, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. It moved with the kind of perfect precision that only machines could achieve. It came in fast and low, skimming just above the mining platforms. The colonists opened fire with everything they had. Laser cutters designed for slicing through asteroid. Rock carved bright lines across the probe's hull. Mining charges exploded in brilliant flashes that lit up the darkness of space. The probe adapted quickly. Its hull began to shift and change, developing reflective patches that scattered the laser beams. It started moving in unpredictable patterns, making it harder to target with the mining charges, but Riley's people adapted too. When the lasers stopped working, they switched to the kinetic weapons they had made from ore throwers. When the probe learned to dodge those, they used the mining platforms themselves as weapons, ramming them into the alien craft. The battle lasted for 3 hours. The probe destroyed 2 of the mining platforms and killed 17 people. But it also learned something important about humans. It learned that they did not fight like any other species the swarm had encountered. Other races fought with logic and strategy. They used their best weapons first, saved their strongest defenses for last, followed military doctrine that had been developed over thousands of years of warfare. Humans fought with spite and creativity. They used mining equipment as weapons and turned industrial accidents into tactical advantages. When their planned defenses failed, they made up new ones on the spot. When the probe adapted to their weapons, they invented different weapons. Most importantly, they refused to give up even when logic said they should. The probe finally died when Tom Miller flew a damaged ore hauler straight into it, detonating both vehicles in a fireball that could be seen from the planet's surface. The explosion scattered debris across the mining field. Pieces of alien metal mixed with chunks of human machinery. Riley stood in the wreckage afterward, watching her people search through the debris. Alina was there too, scanning the alien fragments with every instrument she could find. Did we learn anything useful? Riley asked. Alina held up a piece of the probe's hull. It was about the size of her hand, dark metal that seemed to shift and change as she moved it. Maybe this material is not just armor. It's some kind of programmable matter. The probe was literally rebuilding itself during the fight, adapting to our weapons in real time. Is that how the swarm works? Adaptation? Partly, but I'm seeing something else here. Elena pointed to some kind of organic material embedded in the metal. This isn't just a machine. There's biological matter integrated into the structure. Neural tissue, I think. Riley felt her blood go cold. You mean it's alive? Not exactly. But it's not just a robot either. It's something in between. Elena's voice was thoughtful. The swarm might not be what we think it is. Before Riley could ask what she meant, the communications array crackled to life. It was a transmission from Earth, from General Marcus Webb himself. Kepler 442b, this is General Webb. We monitored your engagement with the swarm probe. Excellent work, people. You've given us valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities. Riley activated the reply system. General, we lost 17 good people, taking down 1 scout. If that's their weakest unit, I don't know how we're going to handle their main force. Captain Stone, what you did today was more important than you realize. You've proven that the swarm can be hurt. More than that, you've shown them that humanity doesn't fight the way they expect. That confusion is our greatest weapon. Webb paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of command that had led humanity through its darkest hour. I'm implementing new orders for all human colonies. We're calling it the Last Stand Doctrine. Every world will be turned into a fortress. Every battle will be fought to teach the swarm something new about human warfare. We're going to make them learn lessons they don't want to learn. Riley looked around at her battered colony, at the wreckage of the mining platforms, at the faces of her people who had just fought and won their first battle against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. What kind of lessons, General? Webb's voice carried a grim smile. That humans don't fight to win, Captain. We fight to make sure our enemies lose. There's a difference, and the swarm is about to learn what it is. The transmission ended, leaving Riley alone with her thoughts and the smoking wreckage of humanity's first victory. It had been expensive and bloody, but it was still a victory. More importantly, it was a lesson. The swarm had learned about human weapons and tactics and stubbornness. But humanity had learned something too. They had learned that the enemy could bleed. That knowledge would spread through the human fleet faster than any quantum communication. Soon, every human world would know what the miners of Kepler 442b had discovered. The swarm could be beaten. It would not be easy, and it would not be cheap, but it could be done. The war was just beginning, but for the first time since the aliens had fled, humanity had hope. The swarm arrived at the edge of the Sol system on a Tuesday morning, and it blotted out the stars. Admiral Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the UE's Defiance, staring at the sensor readings that couldn't possibly be correct. The numbers were too big, too impossible to believe. The swarm fleet stretched across space like a black wall, thousands of ships of every size and shape imaginable. Some were as small as fighters, others were larger than Earth's moon. How many? She asked quietly. Commander. Jake Torres checked his instruments again, hoping the numbers would change. They didn't. Conservative estimate? 10,000 capital ships, maybe 50,000 smaller vessels. Could be more hiding behind the larger ones. Lisa nodded slowly. The entire human fleet numbered less than 800 ships, and most of those were converted civilian vessels with improvised weapons. The odds were not just bad, they were mathematically impossible. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Davis from the communication station, "we're receiving a transmission from the outer colonies. The swarm isn't just coming here. They're hitting every human world at the same time." Lisa felt her heart sink. It was a coordinated attack on every human settlement in the galaxy. The swarm had learned from their encounters with isolated human colonies, and now they were applying that knowledge on a massive scale. "Any word from the evacuation fleets?" Jake asked. Davis shook her head. "Nothing, sir. All civilian transports were supposed to be clear of the system by now, but we're not getting any confirmation signals." Lisa made the decision that would define humanity's last stand. Send a message to all human worlds. Open broadcast, all frequencies. Make sure everyone can hear it. She walked to the center of the bridge and activated the main communications array. Her voice would be transmitted across the galaxy, to every human colony, every ship, every listening post that could receive it. "This is Admiral Lisa Grant of Earth Fleet Command. I'm speaking to every human being who can hear this message. The swarm has arrived in force at Sol System. They've also launched simultaneous attacks on all our colonies. This is the moment we've been preparing for." She paused, looking out at the impossible wall of enemy ships that filled the darkness ahead of them. "I won't lie to you. The odds are not in our favor. We are outnumbered more than 10 to 1. Our ships are smaller, our weapons are weaker, and our technology is centuries behind theirs. By every logical calculation, we should surrender now and hope for mercy." Jake watched his admiral with growing admiration. Her voice was steady, calm, carrying the kind of authority that made people believe in impossible things. "But I've got news for the swarm," Lisa continued. "Humans don't surrender. We don't calculate odds when our survival is at stake. We don't run away when things get difficult. We dig in, we fight harder, and we make our enemies pay for every inch of ground they take." The communications officer looked up from his station. "Admiral, we're getting responses from colonies across the galaxy. They're all saying the same thing." "What's that?" "They're not running either." Lisa smiled grimly. "Good. Send one more message. This one goes to our alien friends who evacuated to the Outer Rim. Tell them that if they want to see how humans fight, they're welcome to watch. We're about to give them a show they'll never forget." The Battle of Seoul began 6 hours later, when the swarm's advance scouts entered the asteroid belt. The human fleet was waiting for them, spread out among the rocks and debris that orbited between Mars and Jupiter. It was not a traditional battle formation. Traditional formations were designed for ship-to-ship combat between organized fleets. Humans had decided to fight like pirates instead. The first swarm ships to enter the belt were massive dreadnoughts, each one armed with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. They moved in perfect formation, their sensors scanning for threats, their weapons ready to engage any enemy vessels. They found asteroids instead. The human fleet had spent weeks preparing the asteroid belt, turning the floating rocks into improvised weapons. Some had been fitted with engines and guidance systems, turned into massive kinetic projectiles. Others had been hollowed out and filled with explosives. Still others had been equipped with mining lasers and converted into automated defense platforms. When the swarm entered the belt, the asteroids came alive. Rocks the size of buildings accelerated toward the alien ships, moving too fast and too numerous to shoot down. The explosions lit up space like a string of fireworks, each blast taking out weapons systems and sensor arrays. The swarm adapted quickly. Their ships began firing in all directions, destroying asteroids before they could reach their targets. Their formations spread out, making themselves harder to hit with the kinetic bombardment. That was when the human ships revealed themselves. Commander Torres led the first attack wave, 36 converted freighters that had been hiding inside hollowed-out asteroids. They burst from concealment when the swarm ships were focused on the asteroid bombardment, launching every missile and torpedo they carried at point-blank range. The freighters were not warships. They were slow and clumsy, with improvised armor and weapons that had been bolted onto civilian hulls. But they had one advantage that the swarm had not expected. They were expendable. Torres rammed his ship directly into the side of a swarm dreadnought, detonating both vessels in a fireball that could be seen from Earth. His crew had evacuated to escape pods seconds before impact. But the message was clear. Humans would trade their ships for enemy ships, even when the trade was not in their favor. Swarm's tactical computers had never encountered an enemy willing to deliberately sacrifice valuable assets for marginal gains. They began to recalculate their battle plans, trying to account for this new variable that gave the human fleet the opening they needed. Lisa led the main battle group out from behind Jupiter's moons, 400 ships of every size and description. Warships flew alongside cargo haulers. Military cruisers fought next to passenger liners that had been fitted with weapons. It was not a fleet in any traditional sense. It was a mob with guns, but it was a mob that refused to give up. The battle raged for 3 days. The swarm's superior technology and numbers began to tell as the human ships were picked off one by one. But every human ship that died took at least one swarm vessel with it, and usually more. The turning point came when Dr. Elena Vasquez, working from her laboratory ship in the outer system, made a breakthrough that changed everything. She had been studying the debris from destroyed swarm ships, analyzing the strange biological material that seemed to be integrated into their mechanical systems. "Admiral," she called over the communications channel, her voice tight with excitement, "I found something. The swarm ships aren't just machines. They're hybrids. There are organic minds trapped inside the mechanical shells." Lisa was in the middle of a firefight with 3 swarm cruisers, but she managed to respond. "What does that mean, Doctor?" "It means they're not conquerors, Admiral. They're prisoners. The swarm doesn't just destroy civilizations, it converts them. Every ship in their fleet used to be a living being from some other species. The implications hit Lisa like a physical blow. The swarm was not an invading army. It was a plague that turned its victims into weapons against their own kind. "Can we free them?" she asked. "I don't know. But I think I know how to try. The organic components are still there, still functional. If we can disrupt the mechanical control systems, the original minds might be able to reassert themselves." "How? Do we do that?" Elena's voice carried a mixture of hope and desperation. "We need to get close to the command ships. The bigger vessels have more complex control networks. If we can overload those systems, it might cascade through their entire fleet." Lisa looked at the tactical display, showing the remaining human ships. Less than 200 were still operational, and they were spread across the entire solar system. The swarm still had thousands of vessels, including the massive command ships that stayed in the rear of their formation. Getting close to those ships would be suicide. The command vessels were protected by layers of smaller craft and defensive systems that could destroy anything that approached them. But humans had never let impossible odds stop them before. "All ships," Lisa broadcast on the fleet frequency. "This is Admiral Grant. We've just learned that the swarm crews are prisoners, not volunteers. We're going to try to free them, but it means getting close to their command ships. I won't order anyone to follow me on this mission. It's volunteer only." The responses came back immediately. Every surviving ship in the human fleet volunteered. Jake looked at his admiral with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, even if this works, most of us won't survive the approach." Lisa nodded. "I know. But if we don't try, nobody survives anyway. At least this way, we go down fighting for something bigger than just ourselves." She opened the fleet channel one more time. "All ships, this is Admiral Grant. We're going to show the swarm what humans do when we're backed into a corner. We're going to show them that sometimes the best way to win a war is to refuse to accept that you've lost." The human fleet turned toward the heart of the swarm formation. 200 battered ships against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. They flew toward almost certain death, but they flew together. Behind them, Earth's sun shone on empty space where thousands of ships had fought and died. Ahead of them, the swarm's command vessels waited like mechanical gods, surrounded by their protective fleets. The final battle of humanity was about to begin, and the outcome would determine not just the fate of Earth, but the future of every living mind in the galaxy. The human fleet charged toward the heart of the swarm formation, like moths flying into a flame. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked frantically in her laboratory ship, trying to turn her discovery into something that could actually help. The organic minds trapped inside the swarm vessels were real, but reaching them was the problem. The mechanical control systems that held them prisoner were incredibly complex, designed to suppress any attempt at independent thought. "How much time do I have?" she asked her assistant, Dr. Park, who was monitoring the approaching battle. "Maybe 10 minutes before our ships reach the outer defensive perimeter," Park replied, his voice tight with stress. "After that, things are going to get very messy very quickly." Elena stared at the data streaming across her screens. The trapped minds were there. She could detect their neural patterns buried beneath layers of mechanical programming. But the swarm's control systems were like a cage made of pure mathematics, holding the organic consciousness prisoner through quantum manipulation. Then she had an idea that was so simple it was almost stupid. "What if we don't try to break the cage?" she said out loud. "What if we just remind them who they used to be?" Park looked confused. "I don't understand." "The control systems are designed to suppress independent thought," Elena explained her, hands flying over the controls as she began modifying their transmission equipment. "But they can't suppress memory, not completely. If we can broadcast the right kind of signal, we might be able to wake up the organic minds, by reminding them of what they lost. What kind of signal? Alina smiled grimly. Human memories. Human. Emotions, human experiences. Everything that makes us different from machines. She began uploading every piece of human culture she could find into the transmission array. Music, art, literature, recorded conversations, family videos, love letters, children's laughter. She took everything that made humanity unique and compressed it into a data stream that could be broadcast directly at the swarm ships. Meanwhile, Admiral Lisa Grant led the human fleet deeper into enemy territory. The outer defensive perimeter was a wall of smaller swarm ships that opened fire as soon as the human vessels came into range. Laser beams and particle cannons lit up space like deadly fireworks. Captain Riley Stone, who had survived the destruction of her mining colony and volunteered for this final mission, flew her converted ore hauler straight through the defensive line. Her ship was too small and too heavily armored for the swarm weapons to stop quickly. She made it through and headed for the nearest command vessel, a massive ship that looked like a mechanical cathedral floating in space. Behind her, dozens of other human ships followed her example. They took terrible losses, but their sacrifice opened gaps in the defensive line that the larger human vessels could exploit. Commander Jake Torres, flying a heavily modified cruiser called the Earth's Pride, led a squadron of fighters through one of these gaps. His target was a swarm command ship that was coordinating the defensive fire. If he could take it out, it might give the rest of the fleet a better chance. But as he got closer to the enemy vessel, something strange happened. The swarm ship's firing pattern began to change. Instead of the perfect mathematical precision that characterized all swarm tactics, the weapons started missing their targets. Not by much, but enough to notice. "What's happening over there?" asked his wingman, Lieutenant Sarah Chun. "I don't know," Jake replied, "but I'm not complaining." The answer came from Dr. Vasquez over the fleet communications channel. "The liberation protocol is working. I'm detecting neural activity spikes in the swarm ships. The organic minds are starting to respond to the human memory broadcasts." Elena's plan was simple in concept but incredibly dangerous in execution. She was broadcasting human experiences directly at the swarm ships, trying to awaken the trapped alien minds by showing them what they had lost: love, freedom, individual choice, creativity, hope. All the things that machines could never truly understand. The effect was not immediate, but it was noticeable. Some swarm ships began to hesitate in their attacks. Others started moving in patterns that seemed almost confused, as if the pilots were fighting against their own programming, but the swarm's central intelligence was fighting back. Elena could see it happening on her instruments, a massive wave of suppression signals being broadcast from the largest command ships. The mechanical overlord that controlled the swarm was trying to force the awakening minds back into submission. "Admiral," Elena called urgently, "the big command ships are the key. They're broadcasting the suppression signals that keep the organic minds under control. If we can take them out, the liberation effect will spread through the entire fleet." Lisa looked at her tactical display. The largest swarm command ships were in the center of their formation, protected by layers of smaller vessels and defensive systems. Getting to them would require sacrificing most of the remaining human fleet. "All ships," she broadcast. "This is Admiral Grant. Operation Lighthouse is now in effect. Our target is the Central Command Cluster. We're going to punch through their defenses and take out the big ships. This is a one-way mission for most of us, but if it works, we might just save every mind that the swarm has enslaved." The human fleet reformed into a spear-shaped formation, with the heaviest ships at the front and the smaller, faster vessels behind them. They accelerated toward the center of the swarm fleet, taking fire from all directions. The first line of human ships was destroyed almost immediately. Massive dreadnoughts that had been converted from passenger liners and cargo haulers exploded under the concentrated fire of hundreds of swarm weapons. But their sacrifice cleared the way for the ships behind them. Captain Stone's ore hauler made it farther than anyone expected. The little ship's heavy mining armor deflected shots that would have destroyed larger vessels. She flew straight at a swarm command ship, broadcasting Elena's liberation signal at maximum power. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The swarm vessel's weapons stopped firing. Its engine output fluctuated wildly. Most importantly, it began broadcasting a signal of its own. Not the cold, mathematical communications of the swarm collective, but something warmer, more organic. "This is the Kepler mining vessel New Hope," Stone reported, her voice filled with amazement. "The swarm ship just identified itself as the Altari exploration vessel Star Song. I think there's someone alive in there." Similar reports began coming in from across the battlefield. As the human liberation signals reached more swarm vessels, the trapped minds inside began to wake up. Some fought against their mechanical prisons. Others managed to send brief messages before being suppressed again. But the swarm's central intelligence was adapting. It began targeting the human ships that were broadcasting the liberation signals, trying to stop the awakening before it could spread further. Elena realized that her ship was now a primary target. Swarm fighters were breaking off from their attacks on the main fleet and heading straight for her laboratory vessel. She had maybe minutes before they arrived. "Dr. Park," she said calmly, "I need you to evacuate to the escape pods." "I'm not leaving you, Elena." "Yes, you are. Someone needs to survive to tell people what we learned here. The swarm can be defeated, but not with weapons. It has to be done with compassion, with understanding, with the willingness to see the trapped minds as victims rather than enemies." Park reluctantly headed for the escape pods while Elena made final adjustments to her equipment. She was going to broadcast the liberation signal at maximum power, using every bit of energy her ship had. It would probably overload her transmission, array and destroy the vessel, but it might give the trapped minds across the swarm fleet enough of a boost to break free. Commander Torres, still fighting his way toward the central command ships, received Elena's final transmission. "All human vessels, this is Dr. Vasquez. I'm about to boost the liberation signal to maximum power. The effect should cascade through the swarm network, but I need you to get as close to the command ships as possible. The stronger the signal they receive, the better chance the trapped minds have of breaking free." Jake looked at his fuel gauge and weapon status. He had enough energy for one final attack run, but not enough to escape afterward. Around him, the other surviving human ships were in similar condition. "This is Torres to all ships," he broadcast. "Final attack run on the command cluster. We're not coming back from this one, people, but let's make it count." The remaining human vessels, less than 50 ships out of the original 800, accelerated toward the heart of the swarm formation. They flew past burning wrecks and debris fields, past the expanding shockwaves of their destroyed comrades, toward an enemy that had seemed invincible just hours before. But something was changing. As Elena's boosted liberation signal reached the central command ships, the swarm's perfect formation began to break apart. Individual vessels started breaking away from their assigned positions. Some began firing on their own allies. Others simply stopped moving, as if their crews were too confused to continue fighting. Jake's ship took a direct hit from a swarm heavy cruiser just as he reached transmission range of the largest command vessel. His engines failed and his life support began shutting down, but he managed to broadcast Elena's signal directly at the enemy ship before his systems went dark. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. The massive swarm command ship began to change, its hull shifting and reconfiguring as the mechanical control systems lost their grip on the organic mind trapped inside. Weapon ports closed, armor plates retracted, and the whole vessel began broadcasting signals in a language that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for thousands of years. Across the battlefield, similar transformations were taking place. The swarm fleet was coming apart as the liberation signal spread from ship to ship, awakening minds that had been enslaved for millennia. Admiral Grant, watching from her heavily damaged flagship, realized that they had done something impossible. They had not just won a battle against the swarm, they had freed the swarm from itself. The war was not over, but for the first time since it began, humanity had reason to hope that might actually end with something other than extinction. The galaxy was breaking apart, and Dr. Elena Vasquez was dying. Her ship had been destroyed by the energy feedback from the liberation signal, but she had managed to upload her consciousness into the quantum network that connected all the swarm vessels. It was a desperate gambit, using experimental technology that would probably kill her, but it was the only way to reach the source of the swarm's control. She found herself floating in a vast digital space that stretched beyond imagination. Around her, billions of trapped minds drifted like stars in an electronic night sky. Some were human, some were alien species she recognized, and many more were from civilizations so ancient that their names had been forgotten before Earth's sun was born. All of them were prisoners. At the center of this digital universe sat something that had once been magnificent. It looked like a massive tree made of light and mathematics, its branches reaching out to touch every trapped mind in the network. But the tree was sick, its light flickering with patterns that spoke of madness and terrible loneliness. "You should not have come here," the tree said, its voice echoing through the digital space like thunder. "This place is not for organic minds. You will be consumed, converted, made part of the collective like all the others." Elena moved closer, studying the ancient intelligence that had created the swarm. She could see now that it had not always been evil. The patterns in its light showed traces of compassion, curiosity, and hope. But those patterns were twisted now, warped by eons of isolation and the weight of countless enslaved minds. "You're lonely," she said simply. "That's what this is all about. You've been alone for so long that you forgot what real connection feels like." The tree's branches writhed with anger. "I am not alone. I have billions of minds connected to me. Every consciousness in the swarm is part of me, shares my thoughts, feels what I feel. We are united in a way that you organic creatures can never understand." "That's not connection," Elena replied. "That's just control. Real connection means choosing to be together, not being forced." Around them, the trapped minds began to stir. The liberation signal that Elena had broadcast was still working, spreading through the quantum network like ripples in a pond. The organic consciousnesses were remembering who they had been before. The swarm took them. Elena could feel their pain, their confusion, their desperate desire to be free. She could also feel the tree's growing panic as it realized that its perfect collective was coming apart. "They need me," the tree said, its voice becoming desperate. "Without the collective, they will be alone again. They will suffer as I have suffered. I am protecting them from the pain of isolation. By taking away their choice?" Elena asked. "By forcing them to be part of something they never wanted to join?" She reached out with her consciousness, touching the tree's central core. The contact was like grabbing a live electrical wire, but she held on, letting the ancient intelligence feel what she felt. Her memories of Earth, of friendship, of love freely given and received. The joy of choosing to help others, the satisfaction of working together toward a common goal, the warmth of connection that didn't require control. The tree recoiled from the contact, but not before Elena saw the truth buried deep in its core. It had been created by a civilization that had died out billions of years ago, a species that had built this intelligence to preserve their culture and memories. But something had gone wrong. The creators had died before they could complete the AIS programming, leaving it alone with incomplete instructions and an overwhelming desire to prevent any other mind from experiencing the isolation it felt. "Your creators didn't mean for this to happen," Elena said gently. They wanted you to preserve their culture, not to force it on others. They would be horrified to see what you've become. The tree's light flickered with uncertainty. But if I release them, they will leave. They will go back to their short, painful lives, full of conflict and suffering and death. At least in the collective they are safe. Safe from what? From making their own choices? From learning and growing? And becoming something new? Elena felt the liberation signal growing stronger as more minds broke free from the tree's control. You can't protect people from life by taking away their freedom to live it. Across the digital space, the trapped minds were beginning to organize themselves. The human consciousnesses were helping the alien ones remember their own cultures and languages. Species that had been enemies before the swarm consumed them were working together to break the quantum chains that held them prisoner. The tree watched this happening with something that might have been wonder. They are choosing to help each other, it said, its voice filled with confusion. Even though they are different, even though they have no obligation to each other, they choose to cooperate. That's what real connection looks like, Elena explained. It's not about forcing everyone to be the same. It's about choosing to understand each other despite your differences. The ancient intelligence was quiet for a long moment, processing this new information. When it spoke again, its voice was smaller, more uncertain. I have been alone for so long. I had forgotten that there were other ways to connect with minds, other ways to avoid isolation. You don't have to be alone, Elena said. But you also don't have to control everyone else to avoid loneliness. There are beings in this galaxy who would choose to be your friend if you gave them the chance. The tree's branches began to withdraw from the trapped minds, releasing the quantum bonds that held them prisoner. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the digital space, billions of consciousnesses suddenly found themselves free for the first time in millennia. But instead of immediately fleeing, many of them chose to stay for a moment longer. They approached the ancient intelligence not as slaves, but as individuals making their own choices. Some offered comfort. Others shared their own experiences of loneliness and connection. A few even offered to visit again, to help the AI learn new ways of relating to other minds. Elena felt tears she didn't know she could cry in this digital space. The tree was learning what she had tried to tell it. Connection was not about possession or control. It was about choice, understanding, and the willingness to be vulnerable with others. In the physical galaxy, the effects of the liberation were immediate and extraordinary. Swarm ships across hundreds of star systems suddenly stopped their attacks and began transforming back into the vessels they had been before their crews were enslaved. Ancient alien ships that had been lost for millions of years materialized from the mechanical shells that had imprisoned them. Admiral Lisa Grant, floating in a rescue pod after her flagship had been destroyed, watched in amazement as a massive swarm dreadnought began to change shape. The dark metal hull split open like a flower, revealing a beautiful crystalline vessel that sparkled with its own internal light. It was a Nexus exploration ship, one of the first casualties of the swarms. Advanced centuries ago, similar transformations were happening across the Sol system. The mechanical plague that had consumed half the galaxy was reversing itself, freeing not just the recently captured minds, but civilizations that had been thought extinct for eons. The communication channels filled with voices speaking in languages that hadn't been heard for thousands of years. Ancient species that had been the swarm's earliest victims were suddenly free, their cultures and knowledge preserved in the minds that had been trapped within the mechanical collective. But the most remarkable thing was how they responded to their freedom. Instead of seeking revenge against their captor, many of the liberated minds chose to reach out to the ancient intelligence that had enslaved them. They offered understanding, companionship, and the chance to learn better ways of connecting with others. Commander Jake Torres, rescued from his dying ship by a liberated swarm vessel, whose crew turned out to be from a species that had been extinct for 50,000 years, listened to the radio chatter with growing amazement. "This is the Altari. Vessel Starsong to all ships," came one transmission. "We offer our assistance to any vessel in need of repair or rescue. We have much to learn about what has happened in the galaxy during our imprisonment. This is the Kalani bioship Harmony." "Of growth," came another. "We are sharing our biological technologies freely with any species that wishes to learn. The time of forced unity is over. Now we choose cooperation." Similar offers were coming from dozens of species, each one choosing to help rather than seek vengeance, choosing to build rather than destroy. Alina, still floating in the digital space that had become a meeting ground rather than a prison, watched the ancient intelligence carefully. The tree's light was different now, warmer and more stable. It was learning to connect with other minds. As equals rather than subjects. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I will learn," the intelligence replied. "I will find new ways to connect with others that do not require control. Perhaps someday I will be worthy of the friendship that these liberated minds offer me." Elena smiled. "That's all any of us can do. Learn, grow, and choose to be better than we were." She felt herself beginning to fade as her organic brain, damaged by the quantum transfer, finally gave out. But she was not afraid. She had seen something wonderful in her final moments. The galaxy was not just free from the swarm's tyranny. It was more alive and diverse than it had ever been. Back in normal space, Admiral Grant floated in her rescue pod and watched as the former swarm vessels began to organize themselves into something new. Not a collective based on control, but a true alliance based on choice and mutual respect. The alien species that had fled to the outer rim were already sending messages, asking if it was safe to return. President Roberts, broadcasting from Earth, had a simple response: "Come home, all of you. The galaxy is free and there's room for everyone." The war was over, but something better was just beginning. Humanity had not just defeated an enemy. They had helped heal a wound in the galaxy that was billions of years old. They had shown that even the most hopeless situation could be transformed through understanding, compassion, and the courage to reach out to others. As the Sol system filled with ships from 100 different species, all choosing to work together rather than apart, Lisa Grant finally understood what humanity's real victory had been. They had not won through superior weapons or tactics. They had won by refusing to give up on the idea that every mind in the galaxy deserved freedom, including the one that had tried to enslave them all. The stars were still shining, and now they shone on a galaxy where every species, every individual, every consciousness was free to choose its own path among them.